Guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined with my good friend and co-host Scott Karasik. Today we are talking about the Falcons 2017 draft class. We're talking about the undrafted free agents, and as usual, we will be answering your guys' mailbag questions. If you have any questions for us that you're watching, anybody that's watching on Facebook right now or YouTube right now, where we are streaming live via satellite, you guys can shoot those questions down in the comments below, and we will get to those questions as we go through the show. So, Scott, as we usually do on this show, we start off talking about any roster moves. We'll get to the undrafted free agents a little bit later, but the Falcons did cut a couple of guys so that they could bring in some of those undrafted free agents. All these guys were various guys that were on the practice squad at the end of the year, and they sort of re-sign them to those future contracts that you see teams do after the season, but they didn't have much of a future because they are gone from the team. Those cuts were Blake Muir, I can't say his name, Muir, Chris Mays, Jimmy Staten, Martin Effetti, and Brian Vogler. Any thoughts on these moves?
I thought they were all going to get cut in September anyway, so, to me, the only one that might be a little bit of substance is Chris Mays, because without Mays, the Falcons are basically saying we're going to sell out on this smaller defensive line in some spots and in our wave guys, and then in our main spots, like our starting spots, we're going to have Dentari, Poe, and Grady Jarrett. But outside of that, we got a bunch of 280-pound dudes.
Yeah, Mays, I thought, before he got hurt last preseason, I thought he showed some nice things in the preseason games, and he's spent the entire year on IR. So I thought maybe if he got another shot this summer, probably wasn't going to make the roster, but certainly had another shot at making the practice squad. And if he could have stuck around on the practice squad for another year, then 2018 maybe, given the possibility of substantial roster turnover at that D tackle position, I thought maybe he had a shot at making the team then. But other than that, nothing substantial. And, the Falcons basically freed up these moves to bring in some of these young undrafted guys and give them a shot in training camp, which makes sense because they needed some additional bodies at various roster spots. But the big topic we wanted to talk about this week was the Falcons draft. They selected 6 players, starting with Takk McKinley in the first round, trading up to get him. They selected Duke Riley, the linebacker, out of LSU in the 3rd round. They traded back from their 2nd round pick into the 3rd round to get Duke Riley. They picked up 2 additional 5th round picks from the Bills in order to make that happen. In the 4th round, they selected Sean Harlow, the guard out of Oregon State. And with the first of those 5th round picks from the Bills, they selected the San Diego State defensive back DeMonte Casey, who played corner in college but probably will move to safety. Brian Hill, the running back out of Wyoming, with that 5th round pick from the Bills. And with their last pick of the draft, they selected Drake tight end Eric Saubert. All right, Scott, I'll give you the floor. And where do you want to start with this, talking about this draft class?
I think we should just go from the top down. So with Takk McKinley, the first thing, a couple of people are going to have sent in, did the Falcons give a little too much up to trade up? I do think that they gave up a little bit too much. I thought they should have only given up their 4th round pick as opposed to their 3rd round pick to move up. I don't like losing a 7th rounder really ever, just because that's always a guy that you don't have to try and reach for. You don't have to really try and wait for later on for undrafted free agency and pray. You could have drafted Andreas Knapp instead of signed him. But other than something like that, the Falcons got the guy they wanted. And while they may have paid a little bit too much, I understand why they got him. And I understand how he fits. He's a true Leo. He fits exactly what they want out at that spot. Start him out this year as a right side defensive end in the nickel. Work him up from there. Up his snap count from there. I'd even say play him 40% of the snaps this year and then just work him in after that. Because right now, he's kind of He's still a little raw, and then he's coming off that shoulder injury. He may miss part of training camp. He may miss all of training camp. So you got to let him kind of work his way in. Don't try and force too much. I'm even open to the idea of re-signing Dwight Freeney to help coach him along this year. I know Aaron's like, well, we've got a defensive line coach for that. But Dwight Freeney mentored Vic Beasley, and Vic Beasley became a monster. I don't see why you can't have Dwight Freeney come in and be like, hey, Tack, this is what I did for years. And it worked for Vic, and it worked for these guys. And let's just try and get everything going. So I think that's what they need to do. And then the rest of it, I mean, Aaron, I'll let you take away the rest of what went on with Tack.
Yeah. Tack had a very interesting introduction into the world with his very, let's say, vocal outbursts when he came out on the stage and when he got selected because he was at the draft, and dropped an F-bomb, I think, on live TV, a couple other swear words. And, for some reason, it was a very polarizing response from a lot of people that watched it live and sort of were, I think, a little overly critical over a guy that was very passionate about being drafted and sort of fulfilling a dream and a promise that he'd made to his grandmother on her literal deathbed just moments before she died, that he was going to become a Division I football player and then eventually go on and play professional football. And so he was very passionate about fulfilling that dream. And I think the Falcons, did a great thing by allowing him to fulfill that dream. But yeah, a lot of people did not like it. And it's weird to sort of see the criticism that he's gotten over it. And, some people sort of making light of his grandmother and her death and whatnot. So, I was personally very excited by it. And, watching it live, like having the TV on mute, sort of, and then seeing him come out there and like, what is going on with this guy? And I hope if he brings half that passion to the football field, then I think the Falcons will certainly get a very good football player.
I completely agree. And I think you need that guy who, this is what we called in college. We called them the goon squad. Like, just the guys that, I don't know how to put it, like, they're just always amped. They're always up. They're always just making everybody around them hyped. You need those guys on your football team. If you don't have those guys on your football team, you're not going to be a very good football team, we'll put it that way. Because football is an emotional game. It's not I'm going to sit here, I'm going to do my assignment. It's no, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to destroy your fucking quarterback every single time. That's how football works. If you're a defensive end and your first thought isn't, I'm going to kill the quarterback or let me smash this mesh point on this run or let me smash this running back right after he gets the ball, what are you doing? You literally have no business on the field if those aren't your thoughts. Let me go get this ball for my team. Like Vic Beasley, you can tell. He goes out there, he plays, and he says, I'm going to attack the ball whoever's got it. Grady Jarrett, you see, that's his thought. That is a defensive lineman mentality. I'm going to attack. Think Danny Bateman from The Replacements. Go get me the ball. Go get me the ball. All right, I'm going to get you the ball. That's the mentality you got to have as a defensive lineman. I'm going to attack. I'm going to destroy. And then that's it. Like, that's what you got to do. So I like having those guys. And Duke Riley is the same kind of guy Tack is. And I think having those guys at every level, it's the same kind of guy Sean Weatherspoon is. You got to have that goon mentality. That doesn't mean off the field they're a bad dude. It means on the field you just want to go and bust some heads.
Yeah, absolutely. We did get a couple of questions about Tack from people. And before we move on to some of the other draft picks, let's get those answered. Evan Birchfield. Of course, Evan Birchfield sends in the first question. Where do you think Tack ranked on the Falcons big board when the draft kicked off?
probably in the top 15. Otherwise, they would have not traded up for him.
Yeah, I mean, surely they thought wherever he ranked, they surely thought he was one of the best 26 players in the draft. So probably a lot higher than that. So let's say 12. I don't know. 12 sounds nice. Digital Demon at Digital Demon 6 on Twitter asks, other than tax bull rush, what do you think is his next best pass rush move is? Also under 5 or over 5 sacks as a rookie. And Evan has a similar question, over under attack having 7 sacks as a rookie.
All right, so I don't think his bull rush is his best move. I think he does convert speed to power well. I just don't think that's his best move. If I had to pick, I'd say it's his dip outside. He dips under the left tackle shoulder, like dipping. Like there's so many different ways to call it. I call it a dip and rip. You dip under the outside shoulder. John Abraham perfected it. I know John Abraham comparison, but John Abraham perfected it. I've never seen someone who runs it the same way John Abraham does, where you're leaning at like a 45-degree angle and just knocking people down. Vic does a good job of it on the left side too. So I think both these guys can definitely do that dip and rip on the outside, and you can get that pincer movement the way that Dom Capers used to love. And I would say that's his best move. Now, over under 5, over under 7, it depends on when Tack's healthy. If Tack is healthy for training camp, I could see 6 sacks. So in between the 5 and the 7. I know that's probably not what anybody wants to hear, but if he's getting 6 and Poe's getting 2 and Jarrett's getting 5 or 6 and Beasley's getting another 10 to 15 and everybody else is getting a whole bunch of just sacks throughout the team, like 2 or 3 here, you're going to have a 40-sack team. So I don't really care if you get, 6 sacks as a rookie, as long as you use that as a launching point for more. I don't want to see 0 sacks as a rookie. Now, if he's not there for training camp, I'm going to go under on both numbers. I think if he's out of training camp because of his shoulder injury, if he's got to be on the PUP list because of it, you're probably looking at 3, maybe 2. But you at least have a reason as to why.
Yeah, I do think his bull rush is his best move. His second best move, I don't really love Tack as his outside dip and rip move. I think his struggles to bend makes it difficult for him to sort of dip that shoulder and turn that corner. In terms of his next best, I don't know if he has a real developed other, second pitch, so to speak. I guess I'm sure the inside swim probably will work just because of his length. But I have, based off of what my film study has seen so far of his, I haven't really seen a reasonably developed secondary move. So it's one of the reasons why I don't have as high an expectation with Tack going into this rookie season. I'm going to say under on both counts. I'm sort of seeing my expectation for his production as a rookie is going to be 2 or 3 sacks, maybe 4. And I think the majority of them will be effort sacks, just because I think he really needs to work on his hand usage. And I don't want people to get it twisted that me not thinking Tack's going to have a really big rookie year is an indicator that I don't think in the long run he's going to be a very good player here. But I do think not having the offseason with the injury, having the jump in competition, being a relatively raw pass rusher, at least from what I've seen, and just having several other guys ahead of him with Beasley and Jarrett and Poe and Claiborne and Reed and Crawford, that I think early in the season are going to get a lot more opportunities than Tack is to rush the quarterback. I don't really see him having this big monster production year. I think it's very possible that we could get to mid-season and he might not have a single sack. And I think maybe we will see him pick up a couple of things in the second half of the year. So for me, in terms of judging Tack's rookie season, I'm looking more at sort of what progress he shows from week 1 to week 17, as opposed to this expectation that he's going to come in and be anything more than a rotational player that first week of the season. But I have been known to be a little bit lower on Falcons picks in the past, and I have been wrong multiple times on that. So this is another opportunity for me to have egg on my face. Let's move on and talk a little bit about Duke Riley, the third-round pick from LSU. I like that pick. It caught me by surprise just because I did not expect the Falcons to take an off-ball linebacker that early in the draft. I thought maybe we would see a guy like Duke Riley maybe in on day 3 at some point, maybe round 5 or something like that. At first I was kind of like, But like once I went back and actually watched Duke Riley, I was like, oh, I get it now. And I thought it was a real smart move for the Falcons to trade back and pick up some additional picks in the 5th round. Scott, what did you think about the Duke Riley selection and trading back to get him?
Right before he was selected, I was like, at 63, I was like, I really hope they're not going to take Duke Riley here. Dan Feeney's right there sitting in their lap. Just take Dan Feeney or trade down. And then they traded down, so I was like, all right, we're good. They can take whoever they want in the top of the 3rd, and I'll be happy because at this point, I had like 8 guys with top 50 grades on my board still available. So I was like, all right, well, just take someone. And then they took Duke Riley, and I'm like, hell yeah, take Duke Riley. Because to me, it says they're putting Devondre Campbell over at strong side linebacker, and you're going to have Duke Riley be your will. And you're going to have Devondre Campbell rush the passer a little bit more. That way, Devondre Campbell, when he's sitting there in a 3-3-5 and he's got a clear lane to go hit Tom Brady on the 3rd and 10, he might actually do it this year. At least get in his face and force a different pass. So, I love the idea of Duke Riley out there. I love the idea of adding speed to the defense, especially at the middle level. I think Duke Riley is a guy who can cover a tight end or cover a running back just like Deion Jones can. And I think that's what you needed in this defense. You needed multiple guys that could do it. I love it. I think it's a great fit. And then that personality, again, Goon Squad. Give me those Sean Weatherspoon types all day. Good off the field, crazy as shit on it. Getting everybody around them amped. That's what I love to see. Give me those guys that get everybody around them amped. You don't want Leroy Reynolds, your backup middle linebacker and special teams ace, being the guy that gets the attitude of the defense. You want the guy who's actually in there every snap, creating the attitude of the defense. So if it's Duke Riley and Deion Jones and they're the ones that create the attitude of the defense, that's what you want to see. If it's Tack and Duke, that's cool too. But you just want to see attitude on there every play. You don't want a defense to play like they've got no soul. I feel like at times this past year we saw a defense that didn't play as energized as you'd want it to be until about the playoffs. And then in the playoffs, they played exactly how you wanted them to play. So if this means that they're going to play like they played in the playoffs all year, give me that defense.
Okay. Yeah, I think Duke Riley's going to be good. And I do like him a lot. I would argue that I think he's a little bit more of a well-rounded player than Deion Jones was coming out of LSU. Now, I think the strengths of Deion's game, particularly the speed and range, are much better than it is with Duke Riley. But I think Duke is a little bit more physical at the point of attack. I think he's a little bit more of a reliable tackler. I think he's a little bit better taking on and shedding blocks, even though I wouldn't say he's great in all 3 of those areas. But I do think, there's a little bit firmer a base of an all-around linebacker, at least when you're evaluating the traits that you look for in a linebacker, that's a little bit better than Deion Jones. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be a better pro than Deion Jones. It doesn't mean he's going to have a better rookie year than Deion Jones. But I do think you have a solid player that this team has shown, at least, has proven that they can develop a linebacker like that. And so I think, he's going to be an interesting player that I think will help out initially on special teams. I think he'll compete for the starting weak side job. I wouldn't be totally shocked if he won it by week 1, but I wouldn't necessarily think the team is going to necessarily rush him in that way, because I think with Devondre Campbell already there, and Devondre is not the type of guy that's just going to lay down and die in a competition. He's going to compete just as much as anybody else out there. I wouldn't be shocked if Campbell still retains that spot, at least to start the year, as they try to get Duke ready and sort of bring him along a little bit more slowly than we've seen with some of the rookies, and particularly last year's rookie linebackers, where they just sort of knew right off the bat, oh yeah, these guys are much better than Paul Warlow and Sean Weatherspoon, so we need to start them right away. As opposed to, I don't think they necessarily have to make that decision now with Duke Riley, with Devondre Campbell, Deion Jones. So it'll be an interesting battle. I think that'll be one of the few actual starting battles on the defensive side of the ball this training camp between Riley and Campbell. And I would put the money on Campbell to win it, but I wouldn't put too much money on it, because I do think Riley will have a better than average shot. Yeah. So we got some Duke Riley questions in the mailbag. Evan Birchfield. Duke Riley is the player I'm most excited about that we selected. What is yours?
Ooh. If I had to... Ooh, that's a tough selection. Damn. Because I'm really excited about Duke, and I'm really excited about Tack, but I think out of all of them, the one guy that could be just insanely good in this defense is DeMonte Kazee. I think he's got that just ridiculous potential in this defense, where he gets drafted in the 5th and then he ends up being the starting nickel long term, and he's like, what's the guy? Kevin Mathis. How Kevin Mathis just would randomly have like 5 interceptions in a year playing nickel. Like, that's amazing. That's what you want. So that's all I can really. That's really the only guy outside of Duke or Tack that I can really go, man, this guy's good. And then the other guy might be Brian Hill. If they let go of Tevin Coleman, or dare I say they let go of Devontae Freeman, I think Brian Hill could be a 1,000-yard rusher in this offense. I think it's a great fit for him, and I think he's got the ability and he's got the vision to do well in it. So.
Yeah, I think if you had asked me, Saturday, I probably would have said DeMonte Kazee. I need to watch a little bit more, just because I've been watching other guys, and other guys are getting me a little excited. But I think, like Evan, I'd probably choose Duke Riley in terms of my excitement for what he can do, just because of what I just said about him maybe being better than Deion Jones was starting out. So, right now I would say that, but I still have only maybe watched 3 or 4 games for all of these guys. And, eventually I want to, or not really Saubert. I've only really watched 2 games for his, but for most of these guys, I'm going to try to watch at least 6 to 8 games before everything's all said and done. So, I do like Tack. I do like Riley. I do like some of the things that Harlow does. He's probably, it's not a knock on Harlow, but he doesn't get me as excited as some of the other players that we drafted. And maybe that's just because he's an offensive lineman, and, he's going to need a little bit more development time there. But I do like Brian Hill a lot. I do like Kazee a lot. I like Saubert a lot from what little I've seen of him. So, I think all these guys get me excited to a certain extent, but if I had to choose one right now, I think, at least looking ahead to the immediate future, I think Riley probably gets me a little bit more excited than some of these other guys. Digital Demon asked, does Duke Riley win the Will spot right away, or is he just in on passing downs?
I think he'll win it outright in training camp. He's that good.
Okay. I don't, I just said I don't think he'll win it, but I do think there's a decent shot he does. So I don't want to sit here and write it off, because I definitely don't want Duke Riley to have it out for me like Deion Jones did to prove me wrong. So um, I will say I think week one he's probably a backup and playing special teams, but maybe week eight we're having a different conversation. But yeah, as I said, I do think that Will spot is probably the one legit open competition for one of the 11 starting spots on the Falcons roster. Obviously the defensive line is a jumble of sort of who's going to be the hierarchy of the rotation, but I think the Falcons essentially know, at least for the time being, who they want to start in several of those roles. But yeah. Okay, similar question. Jason at your boy J94 asks, what does the Falcons drafting Duke Riley mean for Campbell? A reduced role?
I mean, it might mean a slightly reduced role, but I don't know if you really want Devondre Campbell out there for 100% of the snaps. He's not as instinctual as Riley is. And you want to have, at linebacker, your two most instinctual guys, because that's how you're going to play the fastest. That's how you're going to be the best possible defense. So I think Campbell might see a reduced role, but he's going to be playing a better role for his skill set, and he's going to upgrade the defense by playing that reduced in playing time role. I think as a strong side linebacker, setting the edge, manning up on tight ends, playing against or pass rushing at times, sometimes coming in, it'll give the Falcons a chance to run some 3-3-5 in the nickel and pure passing downs where they can have Deion Jones, Duke Riley, Devondre Campbell, Vic Beasley, Tack McKinley, and like Brady Jarrett as the six guys out there. They know it's going to be a pass. They can run blitz concepts. They can run zone blitz concepts. They can run all sorts of different things. Hell, they could rush all six and play straight up man. It gives them that flexibility by having another linebacker. And all last year, we were hoping that we would see Devondre Campbell kind of instantly become that guy, but it was really obvious what was going to happen pretty early in the season, that he just wasn't that pure. He wasn't ready. He wasn't instinctual enough, and he wasn't ready.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think, obviously if Campbell moves to the strong side linebacker, which I think is probably the team's long-term plan, he'll obviously have a reduced role just because the Sam linebacker is not going to play as much as the weak side linebacker, presumably, who will play both in the base and nickel, and the Sam will only play in the base. And you only run base about 35% of the time. But I do think Campbell can sort of hold off on Duke Riley for the time being. I did like some of the things I saw at the end of the year with Campbell in terms of sort of improving on his run fits and showing a little bit more recognition, a quicker recognition skills at the end of the year, particularly in the playoffs, than I think what we saw throughout most of the regular season. So if he can sort of start there and build upon that going into the training camp, I don't necessarily see him losing the job, even if I do think Duke Riley's floor, at least starting off, is a little higher than what Campbell's was a year ago. I do think Campbell still offers a lot of potential in coverage. I think with his length and his physicality, he would give you a little bit more of a thumper in the run game, assuming that his run fits are still good. The biggest issue with Campbell is he gets lost a little bit at times. He's a little slow to read things. But if he can show improvement there, like he did at the end of the season, the games like the Seahawks game and the Packers game stand out to me in the playoffs. I think he can sort of retain the job, at least for this year, and that gives the Falcons a little bit more time to get Duke Riley ready so that come 2018 they can say, yeah, we like the development and the progress that Duke Riley showed over the course of 2017. We can plug him into that weak side spot. We can plug in Campbell at that Sam spot, and we can go to work with those guys and not have to go through the usual growing pains of having, multiple rookie starting linebackers for you. Because, I think that's the thing that's going to be interesting the Falcons did go through a lot of growing pains with both Jones and Campbell last year, and I don't necessarily see them desiring to really go through that again. And that's one of the reasons why I do think Campbell has a leg up on sort of retaining that job, at least for, the start of this season, whether his play continues to play at a high enough level where he can keep that job for the remainder of the season remains to be seen. But, we'll see what happens with that. But I do think having those three guys potentially as your starting linebackers will benefit the Falcons greatly in their defensive scheming going forward, because now you don't have to feel with three fast, athletic linebackers that can cover, you won't feel as compelled as you normally would to automatically go to nickel situations against certain formations. Not to suggest that we're going to see a bunch of Devondre Campbell or Duke Riley covering slot receivers, but, you look at a team like Carolina who likes to play a lot of two tight end sets, and now they have a guy like Christian McCaffrey who can sort of play that Tevin Coleman-like role where he can just sort of start in the backfield and then split out into the slot. You don't have to be as scared as other teams would have to be in sort of sending one of those linebackers out there to cover him like Riley or Campbell, where other teams might be forced to be like, oh, no, we really need a cornerback to cover Christian McCaffrey in a slot. But I think the Falcons have the athleticism to not have to do that. And maybe that's a big reason why the Falcons decided to take Duke Riley a little bit earlier than I think many of us expected them to take a linebacker like him. So, we'll have to see what happens. But I think there's a lot of positive signs overall, even if we do see Campbell's role get reduced. Now, Evan Birchfield has a question specifically about trading back for Riley. He asked Feeney, Dan Feeney, Chris Wormley, and Jordan Willis all went 4 picks ahead of the Falcons taking Riley in the 3rd round. If any fell, would Riley still have been the pick?
That's really tough, because I would have thought that any of those 3 would have been a pick over Riley, just because they all fit more of what Atlanta really needed. And I think if Riley would have been taken instead of one of those guys, we would have seen one of those guys, and Atlanta acted like we traded down. This was the plan all along. Now, I know Aaron's all up in would have been all up in arms about taking 2 edges back to back, but I thought, had they taken Jordan Willis, I would have been absolutely happy. Now, if Feeney fell and they wound up trading back, getting Dan Feeney, and winding up with, Tack and Feeney, I would have loved that too, because I think Feeney instantly upgrades the pass protection you would have gotten from Chris Chester. And I think run blocking, he's a slight downgrade, but I think he might be a better fit for the concepts that Sarkisian runs over what Shanahan ran. So overall, it would have been an upgrade with your 3rd round pick at guard, and you would have gotten a pass rusher. I don't really know if Wormley would have been in this selection. I think Atlanta really likes the defensive lineman they have on the roster right now.
Yeah, I don't think Wormley or Willis would have been options. I think you could certainly make a case with Feeney being a possible option at that 75th pick if he was still there. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The coulda, woulda, shouldas of the draft ultimately are meaningless because there's always a coulda, woulda, shoulda. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Sean Harlow, the 4th round pick. Scott, where do you see Harlow coming in? Do you figure he's going to be in the mix at that right guard spot, or do you think the Falcons are going to redshirt him similarly to what they did with Wes Schweitzer last year?
I think he's going to end up redshirting, and I don't think it's going to be because he wants to. I think what's going to happen is he's going to lose the job. I think he's going to get in a battle with Schweitzer, get in a battle with Thornton, and get in the battle with Garland, and he's just going to lose the job. I think he's going to be in 4th place out of those guys. And it's not really a bad thing if you lose a job and you're a guy who's drafted in the 4th round and your best fit's probably left guard in the NFL, and the guy that they drafted you to probably replace has an $8 million contract year coming up after this season. So I think he redshirts this year, and then next year he takes over for Andy Levitri. I think that's the long-term solution as to what happens there.
Yeah, I think that's probably the plan right now. I would be surprised if he is able to win that starting right guard spot, just because I think with Garland and Thornton and Schweitzer there, you have three guys with NFL experience. You have three guys that have, even though Schweitzer didn't play in the regular season, he did get some reps with the starting offense last preseason. And I would hope that, one of those three guys can sort of unseat Harlow or, beat out Harlow, who's making the transition from tackle to guard for the first time. Maybe Harlow's a lot better than I sort of think he is, and maybe he just sort of blows us away. But I would not expect that, and I do think you're going to see more of a redshirt year from him and be sort of penciled in as the long-term replacement for Andy Levitri in 2018 and beyond. So on that same note, Digital Demon 6 asks, how long do you think it will take Sean Harlow to be comfortable at guard?
I think Sean Harlow might take a minute to get comfortable at guard. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, I think the answer to this question is like 3 years in sort of when you talk about offensive linemen getting comfortable at any position in the NFL, just because the jump in competition is so high. Like, I don't think Sean Harlow's ever going to get comfortable blocking Kawan Short. But it's one of those things where, like, do I think he can get comfortable enough where he can be a serviceable backup by year's end? Yeah, I think so. Will he get comfortable enough where he'll be a serviceable starter by next year? Sure. Do I think he'll be comfortable enough where we're going to be talking about, man, Sean Harlow is one of the best interior blockers in the NFL? That's probably like at least 3 or 4 years away, if ever. So it's one of those things where
we'll never talk about that.
There you go. So
I think Sean Harlow's best case scenario is Andy Levitri now. Like, he's a solid run blocking guard. He's a solid pass blocking guard. He's good all around. He's not amazing, but when you've got a good pair of guys around him, he's okay. And I think that's what you want. Like Andy Levitri's probably a top 15 left guard, and that's about the nicest thing you can say about him. So I think that's where Sean Harlow peaks.
That's fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Let's talk about DeMonte Casey, who will be making the transition to free safety. But, Scott, do you think he will get some legitimate looks as that nickel cornerback?
I think it's very, very possible that he could beat out Brian Poole for that dime role. I don't know if he's going to be the nickel corner, just because I think they want to keep Alford, Trufant, and Collins on the field a lot more this year. But once they do end up getting everything together, I think that's going to be the right move. I think once Collins or Alford moves on, that's when you'll see Casey starting. So probably 2 or 3 years down the line.
Yeah, Casey's going to be interesting because I need to watch more of him. But at San Diego State, he played off zone quarters coverage like 100% of the time. And that doesn't necessarily translate at all to what the Falcons want to do at the cornerback position. He didn't test sort of in the way that you would look for to think that he's a high-level athlete at the cornerback position. But then again, Brian Poole didn't test all that well, and he was able to be at least functional to good as a nickel cornerback for at least half of last season. And, so I do wonder whether Casey's going to be the guy that's in the mix there. But, with his, even though he did test well, I thought his workout at the time did look smooth and work, so maybe I'm selling it a little short. But
I think his best fit's probably safety.
I do think, in terms of his comfort playing zone and sort of reading the field ahead of him, it's just more of a natural fit at safety. But it wouldn't totally shock me if he does have a a couple of looks at that nickel quarterback spot, particularly where the Falcons don't really have a ideal backup slot corner. Should Robert Alford go down, play in the slot, but he is not. You can get into some matchups later on in the season where the last thing you want to do is put Trufant in the slot when we go to nickel, because there are some really good number one receivers that we will face this year that you need to have Trufant out there. And I don't necessarily know if the Falcons really want to move Brian Poole back there. And Goodwin and Olatoye aren't necessarily built to be great slot corners. So I do think there's a decent chance that maybe Casey could get some reps early in the summertime to see if he can sort of hang there. And if he does, then I think he does become a viable sort of emergency option at that nickel cornerback spot in the event of injury. But I do think more than likely Casey's going to be a special teams guy and a reserve guy. But some people are curious, Scott, whether or not you think Casey can have a legitimate push for the starting job, whether that's year one or year two. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, starting nickel, maybe. Starting free safety, probably not. If Allen leaves after 2 years and goes and gets a bunch of money, I could see Casey starting then, but not now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of the transition from being a rebuilding team to a rebuilt team, and I think the expectation in Casey's a good example of this. The expectation that I think a lot of people have that these rookies are going to come in and push guys for starting gigs, I think is a little bit overblown. I don't think Casey's going to leapfrog Allen or Poole as the safety. I think Casey's going to be relegated to a reserve spot. I do think Casey does have a lot of upside, and I do think because he'll be able to sit the bench for at least a year, if not two, that upside will have time to be developed, as opposed to where we basically 2 years ago when Ricardo Allen was thrown out there at free safety, the Falcons didn't have a better option at that time. It was either Ricardo Allen or Charles Godfrey. And, they chose the right option in that choice. But it's one of those things where they're not forced to be in that situation right now with Casey and a lot of these rookies, where they don't have to start some of these guys and force them into the lineup earlier than probably what they're technically ready to handle. So I do think Casey, 3-4 years from now, we could be talking about Casey as being the best player from this draft class. I think that's a plausible outcome, but I don't necessarily see that happening this year or even necessarily next year yet. So we'll have to see how quickly he develops there. Okay. So let's talk about the running back, Brian Hill. Who was the 5th round pick. And, apparently everybody's talking about, what does this mean about the future of the running back position? Is this a shot at Devontae Freeman, his contract situation? Is this the eventual replacement for Tevin Coleman if he leaves in 2 years? Scott, do you have a stance on this?
I think that's part of it. I think it's also they wanted a guy who could be a power back for those 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situations. Yeah, I know you're going to have Devontae Freeman in there in some cases, but I think you want to have that guy who you can take out. And it's also because Coleman and Freeman have gotten injured at times, and the offense just dies when one of them goes out. And you don't want that to happen. So why not have a third guy who can actually move the ball and actually have the offense keep rolling? As much as you like Teron Ward for special teams, he's not that guy if Coleman or Freeman go out. He's not great on offense. And you want that guy who can, at a minimum, get you 4 yards of carry every time he touches the ball. And I think that guy's Hill.
No, look, you won't have me argue that Teron Ward is better than Brian Hill. That's a ridiculous argument. Brian Hill is a clear upgrade as a running back than Teron Ward, but Teron Ward averaged 4.9 yards a carry last year. So let's not act like this offense just fell off of a cliff for those 5 games that Teron Hill filled in as the number 2 guy. So, I think And I'll talk a little bit about Brian Hill, but first I do want to say that I think Teron Ward is to this coaching staff what Jason Snelling was to the last coaching staff, and I think I don't think Teron Ward is as good as Jason Snelling was, but I do think he sort of serves a similar role where regardless of what you ask him to do, he could do it. And I think this coaching staff has shown a great deal of trust in Teron Ward ever since he showed up. When Freeman and Coleman went down with injury that first week in training camp in 2015, who was it that the coaching staff turned to be the starting tailback and get all his reps? It was Teron Ward. So while I do think Hill is an upgrade over Teron Ward, I think people are, the demise of Teron Ward as a player that's going to continue to play in Atlanta, I think has been greatly exaggerated. As for Hill, I think people trying to read into does this mean anything about Freeman or Coleman? I think that's overblown as well. I think the Falcons saw a good backup running back that they can develop in the future. I don't think this means anything with Freeman and Coleman. I think Freeman is just as likely to get a second contract from the team as he was before we drafted Brian Hill. I think Tevin Coleman is just as likely to get a second contract before we drafted Brian Hill. I think the Falcons showed with the cornerback situation last fall that they're going to pay guys if they think they deserve it. And if Freeman earns a contract, which I think he has, and assuming he continues to play at the same level, he'll get paid. And I think if the Falcons feel like they can afford Tevin Coleman next year after he becomes a free agent, I think he'll get paid. And I think because I don't think Brian Hill means that they won't pay either one of those guys, but I do think it's a good move that it does give them insurance in case they lose one or both of those guys, that he can sort of step into that role. But I don't think it's destined that Brian Hill's going to be the number 2 running back in 2 or 3 years, but it's certainly possible. We got a question from Mr. Damian Horn on Twitter. He asked, could Brian Hill double as a fullback and an RB3, especially if he added 15 pounds?
You don't want him to add 15 pounds because then he gets way slower. And you don't want a guy who's going to double as a fullback and a third running back. It doesn't really work. Honestly, I think Atlanta would be best off just letting the 3 guys that got there battle it out. Let Tyler Renew, let Soma Vainuku, let Derek Coleman, let those 3 guys battle it out for that starting role. You're not going to use a fullback more than 15% of the snaps. But you don't want to have a guy like Brian Hill, whose best role isn't as a run blocker. The dude has never run blocked in his life. He's only ever pass blocked, ran the ball, or caught the ball. So why are you going to sit there and just have him run block? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work for him. So what I would personally do is I would just have him as the third running back and then let those 3 guys who are battling for fullback battle to the death. And whoever the best special teamer of those 3 fullbacks is, that's who you keep on the roster. Because I don't think he's going to be in there long enough to really block that often. And you go from there.
Yeah, I don't think Brian Hill's skill necessarily translate well to being a fullback, even if he did gain 15 pounds. I think he's a physical runner. I don't necessarily know if he's quite the physical blocker that you would think a guy his size. I think he'll get better at that. But as is, I think you're still, a ways away from him sort of being that reliable option in pass protection that I think he has the capable of being. That's usually the biggest thing that running backs struggle with in their transition to the league. So I don't expect Brian Hill to be an exception to that. I think if you were to try that with anybody, I think he would try it with Teron Ward, just because of his experience in the scheme means that he at least understands the blocking concepts a little bit more, because Hill played more in a gap man blocking system at Wyoming than the zone blocking scheme. I do think Hill has the vision, and he will adapt to the zone blocking scheme pretty quickly, because I really do like his vision, but I don't necessarily know if he's the guy that you want right there, right away, sort of lead block. I agree with Scott. I think you have 3 guys that you have on the roster already compete for that job, and whoever wins that job is the starting quarterback. Okay, Digital Demon asks, what kind of yardage are you expecting from Brian Allen? Can he catch out of the backfield?
The first year, not expecting much, maybe 250, 300 yards on like 50 carries max, 60 carries max. And he can catch out the backfield. He's just not exactly – he wasn't asked to do it at Wyoming, so he's not experienced at it. But he can catch out the backfield and turn a short screen into 25 yards. He can catch it out. I don't know if he can line up the way that Tevin Coleman can, where he just lines up and goes out wide and sprints up the field. That's not his thing. That's not his deal. But he can catch.
Yeah. I'm not expecting Brian Hill to get more, assuming that our guys are healthy. I wouldn't expect him to get more than 30 or 40 touches. So, times 4, I guess that'd be 120, 150-ish yards or whatever. So, and as Scott said, I do think when he's been asked to catch the football, he seems to have natural hands, but I don't necessarily, he wasn't asked to do it a lot at Wyoming, and I don't necessarily see that being a huge part of his game, at least early on. Over time, he might get a little bit more comfortable there, but for the time being, I don't really see him being that big of an option on third downs. Okay, so I sort of answered this question, but I'll get Scott to answer this. Evan Birchfield asks, what do you expect to happen with Ward with the Falcons drafting Hill?
I think he ends up getting cut.
Yeah, I think he's going to stay. I think we're going to find a way to keep 4 running backs. I think the coaching staff really likes Teron Ward.
Then they're only going to keep 5 wide receivers.
I think that's plausible. I think especially if Andre Roberts winds up winning the punt returner job. I think that's very possible.
I think Andre's going to win the punt return job. I just don't think he's going to win the kick return job. I think the kick return job is either going to go to Fuller, Gabriel, Hardy, or maybe even Ward.
Ward did return kicks in the preseason 2 years ago. They were on the verge of putting Tevin Coleman at kicks last year. So, ultimately you can put Matt Schaub out there returning kicks because kickoffs don't really matter because they're all touchbacks anyway. But I don't think that's going to be a huge concern for them. Okay,
Ward did return kicks in college too.
Let's talk about Eric Saubert. And does his selection end any possibility that Jacob Tamme comes back?
No. I think the Falcons keep 4 tight ends on the roster just because of the amount of 12 personnel that Sarkisian likes to run. He runs a lot of 2 tight end. He runs it all the time. I think you're going to have 4 tight ends on the roster, 4 different kinds of guys, so you can mix it up too. So you've got your all-around, do-everything tight end in Austin Hooper. You got your primarily a blocker, but more of that vertical kind of tall, big body in Toilolo. You've got a guy who can flex around and play different spots on the field very effectively, I feel like, in Sobert. And then the last type you would want would be an H-back type who can line up just behind, just on the hip of the tight end, can flex down to fullback, be a blocker at times, can flex out wide. That's the 4th kind of tight end you want. And right now you got Josh Perkins who can do that. If you do bring Tamme back, that's the role he fits.
Okay. I don't think Tammy's coming back. I'll say that right now. I think Saubert pretty much killed that dream. I do agree with you that I think it's likely that the Falcons will keep 4 tight ends, but I think only if guys like Perkins or Tilavea actually merit the job. I don't think Perkins is a lock to make the team, and I think Saubert is a potential upgrade at that spot just because I think at this point in time, I think he's a little bit better as a blocker than Perkins is. And I think if you're going to play those multi-tight end sets, your second and third tight end need to be able to at least function as blockers because the truth of the matter is that's going to be primarily what they're asked to do. They're not going to be asked to do a whole lot in the passing game. Josh Perkins made a couple of nice grabs last year in the passing game, but I don't see him being a huge part of the passing game this year. But I don't want to write off Josh Perkins because I do think if he can improve his blocking and continue to show ability in the passing game, it'll be hard for the Falcons to cut him. Digital Demon asks, any chance Eric Saubert takes the tight end 2 spot from Levine this year?
I would doubt it. I would absolutely doubt it.
Yeah, I think there's like no chance unless there's an injury. Levine's locked in at that tight end 2 spot. I think Saubert could take it next year, but in terms of sort of really being a threat to take that job right away, I don't think it at all. Okay, I think we answered most of those other questions. We got a couple more general draft questions, unless you have anything else specific you want to say about our 6 picks, Scott.
Other than I like the setup. I liked who they got. I think they all fit a certain personality type. I think they all fit a certain play type.
All right. Evan Birchfield asked, were you shocked that we didn't go after any D tackles?
I don't know. I'm not. I really wasn't because they signed Ntari Poe, and you look at the Falcons' defensive tackle rotation. You got Poe, you got Hageman, you got Upshaw, you got Jarrett, you got Shelby, you got Claiborne, you got Crawford. Like, how many defensive tackles do you need?
Yeah, I wasn't shocked that we didn't go after D tackle. I thought it was a chance that we might, but I didn't think it was like guaranteed that the Falcons were going to draft D tackle. I would have been shocked if we didn't go after a guard. I would have been shocked if we didn't go after a tight end. I would have been shocked if we didn't go after a pass rusher. But, any other position, I wouldn't have been shocked over. Bruce Long, Big Boy Brewski on Twitter asks, out of the 6 draft picks, which one was the most shocking selection?
I'd say Duke Riley. The rest of them all really made sense for the Falcons' needs on the surface. Duke Riley, you didn't really look at the Falcons linebackers and say, oh, they absolutely need to go get a weak side linebacker. But the move makes sense.
Yeah. For me, it's definitely Duke. I thought they might go after depth later in the draft, but to see them basically use their number 2 pick on a linebacker was certainly a shock to me. Not to suggest it's a bad move, as Scott said, but it just didn't. It wasn't a move that I thought was going to be a high priority. Big Boy Brewski asked, the 6 picks, what players do they resemble? So I guess he wants some player comps for some of these guys. I don't know if I can give you a player comp for all 6, but I can give you for some. I would say for Tack, I would go. I think his player comp is Willie Young. I think his ceiling is maybe Tamba Hali.
I was going to say Tamba Hali.
Duke Riley, Deion Jones. It's a lazy one, but it's pretty good.
For me, Duke Riley's Sean Witherspoon. At his peak, he could be Sean Witherspoon at Spoon's peak. I think Sean Harlow is Andy Levitri. Like, just looking at everything, looking at how they came out, looking at all their measurables, watching their film. Levitri played tackle in college too, so I think it fits. And then Kazee is Ricardo Allen.
Yeah, I don't have any good comps for our day 3 guys. I'm sorry, I just don't have one yet. So, yeah, sorry, Bruce.
I can give you a couple.
Go ahead.
So, Brian Hill. What was his name? Jay Ajayi out of Boise State. That's probably the best comp I can think of for him. And then Eric Sobert, I don't really love this comp, but Jason Morrow.
Okay.
Very raw coming out, quick, big guy, awful blocker, more of a flex guy, more of like that interior wide receiver. Guy who you think could be potentially a poor man's Jimmy Graham if he gets all of his shit together, but may not ever become anything. So basically Jason Morrow, but where Jason Morrow should have been drafted after watching 3 years.
Big boy Brewski, what's the ceiling for our offense and defense with the addition of the 6 picks added?
The ceiling for the offense is what it was last year, best in the league. The ceiling for the defense is not what it was last year, but it's probably better than last year. It could be a top 10 defense. I think that's the ceiling. I'm not saying it's going to be like Seattle or one of those like badass defenses yet. Now, if they get there, fuck yes, we're all going to be happy. But I do think that it went to an average defense last year. I think it's going to be an above average in that 10 to 12 range this year. And I don't feel like that's being too homer.
I don't think these picks really change the ceiling for either side of the ball. But I do think even before the draft, like again, I don't think the Falcons are going to be relying on this draft class as much as they have the last two to help them out on either side of the ball. But I think the ceiling for the offense, yeah, that's as Scott said, the best in the league. Probably, one that can score 30 points a game, but probably is in that 27 to 30 point range. Is probably a realistic ceiling as opposed to the absolute ceiling. Defensively, I think the scoring offense ceiling is pretty high. That's potentially a top 5 unit in terms of points allowed, just because if the offense is playing at a high level, it was weird last year to have such a great scoring offense and have such a bad scoring defense, because that usually doesn't happen. Usually you get situations like the Patriots where you play a bend but don't break style of defense, where you give up yards but you get stops in the red zone and you keep other teams from scoring. And I think that's probably more the ceiling of what the Falcons could be. They may not be top 10 in DVOA or total yards, but they could be top 10 in terms of points allowed. So, I think they certainly have the capacity to be, when you average everything together, third down defense, pass rush, red zone defense, all those sorts of things. I think they can be a top 15 unit. Okay. Evan Birchfield, do you see any of our draft selections not making the roster?
No. I think they all make the roster. Unless they get injured and end up on injured reserve, I think they all make the roster. Or Tack starts out on PUP, I think they all make the roster.
Yeah, I think this year we'll have the first time where we see all the guys make the roster. I don't feel like any of these guys, I think some of the picks we've seen in the 7th round the last couple of years, like Jake Rogers and whatnot, were more just, we got a body and we needed a body. And I don't think any of these guys are going to qualify as a body. Now, I think there's a decent chance that several of these guys might be inactive the entire year. But,
Sean Harlow.
Yeah,
maybe
like Harlow. I think there's a chance Casey could be inactive the most of the year too, just because I don't necessarily see the team needing to activate all those safeties, particularly if Poole plays there and Niesman winds up making the team, whatnot. So Saubert could also be inactive if Perkins has a good summer as well and sort of keeps that third tight end spot. So, yeah, we'll see. All right, let's touch upon the undrafted free agents. The Falcons signed 21 of these guys. I'll list them right now. Quarterback Alec Turgerson, fullback Tyler Renew, wide receivers Reginald Davis III, Deontay Burton, and Josh McGee. Offensive tackles William Freeman, no relation, Daniel Brunskill, Robert Leff, and Andreas Knapp. Center Cam Kaiser. I think there's a guard in there, Travis Averill, as well. They signed a bunch of edge guys. including Darius English, Chris Odom, and JT Jones. Off-ball linebacker Christian Tago. Cornerback Taylor Reynolds, Janor Jones, and Quincy Mose. Safety Marcellus Branch, Jordan Moore, and Deron Washington. Scott, of any of those guys I named, who has a shot at making this roster?
I think you got Tyler Renew at fullback, and that's might just be my college homerism showing through, but
Yep.
I think that he could legitimately give Derek Coleman or some of Inuku a run for their money as the starting fullback, while also being that running back 4, running back 5, that if you need that short yard and you want to hand it to your fullback, he can actually get that yard, because he was a B-back in the Citadel's offense, which is a lot like Georgia Tech's. And then I also think that you're going to see what was that other position? I think you're going to see Andreas Knapp, or Nate, or however you say it. I think he's going to make the roster as that swing guy.
Okay. Yeah, I think the Falcons are pretty good for the most part across their roster, where I think it's going to be a little harder to see a Brian Poole type or a Ryan Schrader type make this team this summer. I think the offensive linemen probably have the best shot, just because, particularly the tackles, just because the Falcons don't have an established swing tackle. Knapp is probably the most talented of that group, but I think Brunskill and Leff and Freeman all have a shot there. Maybe Darius English. I've seen a couple of these guys play. If anyone of the ones, a few I've seen a couple of snaps of theirs, I think Taylor Reynolds is a guy that impresses me the most. I don't think he'll necessarily make the roster, but I do think we could see him be, put on the practice squad and to sort of be their sort of long-term project that may have a little bit more of that ability as a slot corner long-term, to be a little bit more of a poor man's Robert Alford in that sort of capacity. I don't know about maybe Alec Torgerson, just because he's young and he's got a strong arm.
Are we counting the practice squad?
There's a shot that maybe Matt Schaub just really struggles this summer, and Torgerson makes a couple big time throws in the third quarter of some preseason games, and the Falcons are like, you know what? We know this is going to be Matt Schaub's last year in Atlanta, so let's keep this kid around and let's see what he can do. Maybe, I don't know. All right. I think you just answered that question. Abraham Luez at Luez Abraham on Twitter asks, what are your 2 cents on Quincy Mose, whatever his name is?
When I watched Georgia this past year, he didn't pop. If a dude doesn't pop on film, I don't really see anything in him. I know Georgia fans love him, all that good stuff. I don't get it. I don't really see anything great. He's just a dude. He's just a guy. I don't think he's going to make the roster. I don't know if he's going to make the practice squad. I guess for me, I thought Maurice Smith was better. And I don't even know if Maurice Smith signed with anybody.
I've only seen a little bit of him. I don't watch Georgia football all that much. I know, shock. But to me, if he plays cornerback, I'd be a little bit more intrigued with him than necessarily him playing safety. Just because I don't necessarily see, I think that we have a glut of safeties right now on this roster, and I don't really see him showing a whole lot there. I think cornerback is a position where some of these young guys like a Taylor Reynolds or a Mosier could have an opportunity to sort of impress in at least enough to make a practice squad spot, not necessarily a roster spot. But I think with his size and maybe his physicality, that he could be sort of a similar player to C.J. Goodwin or Deji Olatoye if he plays corner. But as a safety, I just think, whatever.
I think either way, he's just whatever.
I mean, that's usually the story of all undrafted free agents. So, but
Yeah, I mean, I know people love him. He's a Georgia guy, and people are craving to have the Falcons draft a Georgia guy and have this Georgia. Can we get a good player from Georgia to actually come into the draft at a need that the Falcons actually have for once? Like, yeah, Chris Mays, Garrett Scant, like, yeah, they got 3 Georgia guys on their roster. I don't think come opening day they're going to have 3 Georgia guys. I mean, 2018 might give you 1, but I don't see a Georgia guy being worth an Atlanta Falcons first round pick anytime soon.
Okay.
Well, when was the last one? When was the last Georgia guy that was worth a Falcons first round pick?
Look,
Alec Ogletree?
I don't agree. I don't disagree with these guys. I just know, it pisses off at least a third of our listenership. So I just was not going to say anything about it. But
oh no, I'll go into a rant right now on that shit. Like, yeah, just because the guy played at Georgia doesn't mean he's great. Just because the guy plays at Georgia Tech doesn't mean he's great. Just because the guy plays at Alabama doesn't mean that he's great.
However, if the guy does play at Pitt, it does mean that he's great. So
it does also mean that Aaron's going to be on his nutsack. So,
well, I'm just saying, like, you look at
he might run a little slower carrying that extra 200 and whatever Aaron weighs.
Just saying, like, when our guys make it to the pros, it's not often. They end up usually being very good. Larry Fitzgerald, Darrelle Revis, Aaron Donald. I don't know, but hey, watch out, Dorian Johnson. But anyway, let's get on to the rest of the mailbag questions. Falcons, Andy, is there space for Freeney as a player, or would any signing be purely for mentoring purposes?
I think there's space for him as a player, because I think on actual game days, we're going to see 4 defensive tackles and 4 defensive ends active. Depending on the team is going to depend on who's active. So you may have a game where Jack Crawford's not active, but you've got Dwight Freeney, Vic Beasley, Takk McKinley, and Brooks Reed as your ends. And then inside, you're going to have Claiborne, O, Jarrett, and Hageman. Or you may have a week where Hageman's not active, but Shelby's active. I think they keep 10 guys, but basically it's saying you want to have Dwight Freeney or Courtney Upshaw on the roster is what I'm looking at it as. And I'd rather have Dwight Freeney. That's just me.
I think there's room for Dwight Freeney on the roster. I think there's space for him, but I think, that space is, I think, the space that the Falcons want Takk McKinley to fill. So I do think if you bring back Freeney, you're going to be hurting the development of Takk McKinley. And I don't think that's necessarily something that the Falcons want to do. So, I think that's one of the reasons why the Falcons said that they had no intention of bringing back Freeney before the draft, and they were going to wait and see. And I think because they fully intended on using that top pick on a pass rusher. So I think, if Takk winds up missing a significant chunk of the preseason, when we get to training camp and they're like, oh no, he's going to miss another month, then I think the Falcons might flirt with bringing back Freeney on a short-term basis until Takk is ready. But in the meantime, I don't necessarily see how you can maximize both of those 2 guys on the roster at the same time, since I think they're both destined for the same role. Okay. Andy asks, which vets, if any, do you think are on the roster bubble?
Ooh. Courtney Upshaw, Rashid Hageman, C.J. Goodwin and Deji Olatoye, Bleedy Ray Wilson, Sherrod Niesman, you can call him a veteran at this point. Brian Poole might even be on a roster bubble. I know he had a solid season last year, but if Kazee beats him out, Kazee beats him out. And if they deem him unnecessary, he's unnecessary. And that sounds cold, but that is what it is. I'd throw Hugh Thornton out there. I'd throw DJ T. LeVay out there. I'd say Nick Williams, Devin Fuller, and Teron Ward.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to limit it to just guys that have been around for at least 2+ years because I don't necessarily feel it's right to call Josh Perkins a veteran. But I'll say Teron Ward, Nick Williams, Akeem King, Courtney Upshaw, and maybe Rashid Hageman. He might be on the bubble a little bit too. Yeah,
Hageman's on the bubble. Like, it's his final year. It's a contract year, and if he doesn't ball out in camp, and Courtney fucking Upshaw takes his spot.
Yeah, I mean, with guys like I think Hageman will probably stay. I wouldn't put money on it, but like when you have guys like Shelby, Upshaw, and Crawford that can all sort of do what I think Hageman can do, there isn't as much room for 4 guys like that on the roster as there is. You can sort of plug and play with 3 guys. I think the thing that will help Hageman is maybe Shelby won't be 100% when the season starts, but if Shelby's recovery goes, stronger and he looks more like Corey Peters a couple of years ago coming off an Achilles and Corey Bierman coming off that Achilles, then I don't think Hageman can sort of rest on his laurels necessarily and be guaranteed a roster spot. But I wouldn't, it's probably at least a 75 or 80% chance that Hageman makes a team. But if we're talking about guys that have sort of established themselves that might not be guaranteed a roster spot, I think Hageman would be on that list. All right, Evan Birchfield asks, how confident are you in our right guard position given our options currently?
Honestly, it's like going into a dark room and hoping there's no one there. I'm scared as fuck right now. Like, I probably just kind of gave y'all a peek into my own personal fears, but like, you ever go into a pitch black room and just kind of hope that nothing happens and you turn the light on and you kind of have that relief? I kind of want that to happen with the right guard position. Like, oh shit. Is it Schweitzer? Is it Garland? And then in preseason, one of them just dominates and you're like, all right, I trust it. I trust that Schweitzer can be the guy, or I trust that Garland can be the guy, or I trust, hey, look, Thornton is back to what he was in college, and he actually looks good. Like, if that's what happens, Thornton was a really solid right guard when he was up in Indy, but being in Indy kind of sucks because there's no talent around him. So I almost wonder what he would look like with Alex Mack and Ryan Schrader around him, and see how he would look. If Thornton comes in, wins the job, clear out, and sticks, you got a 25-year-old right guard that was drafted in the 3rd round that came here for pennies, and, you might have a legitimate starting guard out of him. And I kind of hope that's what happens, just because I'm one of those guys that likes the proven commodity over the unproven commodity. But you know what? If he doesn't do that, and he's still just a good, solid backup, that's still worth having on your roster. But, yeah, I'm scared as fuck. I'll put it that way. I want one of these guys to alleviate my fear.
My confidence that, the right guard position, regardless of how it turns out, won't break the offense. I'm pretty confident in that, I think the offensive line is a core component of your offense, but I do think any decent coaching staff can sort of coach around one position as a liability, and I think that's ultimately all you're really concerned about with that right guard position. Now, if the Falcons suffer injuries to the other 4 starters, then it becomes a little bit more of a problem in that issue, because then you're not dealing with one weak link in the chain, but multiple weak links in the chain. So I think that should be a far greater concern for people than just the right guard position. In terms of confidence that we'll get good play out of our right guard, I'm not that confident. I think when the Kawan Shorts and the Gerald McCoys of the world are going to absolutely destroy whoever is the right guard for us this year. But, I think we can get decent play, whether it's Schweitzer or Garland or Thornton at that spot, or even Harlow, even though I think the chances of Harlow winning that job are less than 1%. I would probably, if I was putting percentages on it, I'd probably just put Thornton at maybe like 15%. I'd probably put Garland at 30%, and then probably Schweitzer, if my math is correct, at 55%, whatever is the leftover. So I think Schweitzer's going to win that job. I think he'll have his growing pains, as all young offensive linemen do, especially young offensive linemen, getting their first real action in the NFL. But I think ultimately, and I'm going to say this name, and I know people are going to be like, "Oh no, that's the worst thing that's ever happened." But I think ultimately you can sort of expect Schweitzer's play to be comparable to Mike Person's play. And I know, like, everybody in the mama thinks Mike Person was the worst thing that happened to the Falcons' interior offensive line since the dawn of time. I sort of disagree with that notion. But if Mike Person was playing guard beside Alex Mack, I don't think people would have sort of the problems with his play as much as they do when he was basically playing the Alex Mack role. So
the problem with Person wasn't his blocking. The problem with Person was the fact that he had no idea what the hell to call up front on the line.
Yeah, and Schweitzer's not going to have that responsibility. So
no.
That's what I mean by that. But I know when I say the words Mike and Person in the same sentence, people's, their brains go into that evil, mad mode, that anger mode that, they see red. So, I think Schweitzer will do okay. I don't necessarily know if 2018 is going to roll around and we're going to not be saying guard is a need, but I think he'll do at least a decent enough job that Matt Ryan will still be breathing at the end of the season. All right. Evan Birchfield asks, do you see us making any free agent signings before training camp?
The only one I could possibly see is Dwight Freeney, even if it's not like I don't know if Dwight would come back knowing that he's going to see a large reduction in his role, but I think that would be the one signing that I could see happening.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, we've made some May moves the last two off seasons, so I think there's a chance that if some veteran swing tackle gets cut, over the next month or so, where like a Tyler Columbus type of player becomes available. I think the Falcons could make a move on that guy, but other than that, I don't necessarily see the Falcons making a free agent signing between now and in July. So maybe, but probably not. Evan Birchfield asks, who had the best draft in the NFL and who had the worst?
I really like the Browns draft. And I know that's probably going to sound counterintuitive, but you get a long-term starting quarterback. You get a project at left tackle in Roderick Johnson. You get a starting tight end. You've got the best pass rusher in the draft. You got the perfect fit for a strong safety in Greg Williams' defense. You've got a solid rotational piece at defensive tackle in Caleb Brantley. You've got a good starting three-tech in Larry Ogunjobi. I mean, Howard Wilson's depth at corner. They drafted a kicker, which, again, is stupid. But they did it in the 7th round with, 4 picks left, which is forgivable. If you're going to draft a kicker, do it in the 7th round. I'm not ever going to be mad at that. I think it's a good pick. Because you're basically saying, I don't want to outbid all these other assholes for this dude. I just want this guy on my roster. I'm cool with it. And then they got a depth running back to add to their collection. So I thought they did a great job. And they got a 1st and 2nd round pick next year for their troubles. So, or they got 2 extra 2nd round picks next year for their troubles, I should say. So I think the Browns had arguably the best draft, and I think they're going to continue to have some of the best drafts year after year after year because they're going to keep doing stuff like trading down and getting the next year's pick. And when you have 12 picks and you turn it into 9 solid players and 2 picks for next year, that's how you build a good roster.
Okay. Um, I think I'm going to go with the Cardinals, even though I know I'm a little biased on that one. I really like the the first couple of picks they had. I think they got some really great value with some of their picks. I like Hassan Reddick. I think he'll be a great fit in that scheme. I think he could probably, in a very short period of time, be the best linebacker on that roster. I think Buda Baker will be great in that scheme, sort of taking over the Tony Jefferson role as sort of this guy that plays all over the place. And with Tyrann Mathieu and Patrick Peterson, I think gives you a lot of ability in the back end. I think Dorian Johnson was a great pick in the fourth round. He fell because of a liver issue. That was something that he was apparently born with. Hasn't really affected him, but NFL teams found it at the medical rechecks a couple of weeks ago, and they didn't know what to do about it. So it scared him off, and so he basically wound up going a round or two later than he probably should. But I think he's an instant starter for them at right guard. I think they got Scott's boy T.J. Logan, who I never necessarily saw as a great guy for the Falcons, but I do think Arizona's offense really does like having those explosive guys that can sort of be that Andre Ellington type of guy. And I think they found some nice depth with some of their other picks. So I'll go with the Cardinals on that. Scott, you have any? Go ahead.
The worst draft is by far the Bears. Gave up a third and a fourth and a third next year to get Mitch Trubisky, who they could have stayed because the 49ers were going to take Solomon Thomas regardless. That was stupid. Then they got Adam Shaheen probably 2 rounds too early. They got Jordan Morgan probably 2 rounds too early. They got Tariq Cohen probably 3 rounds too early. The only pick that I saw from the Bears that I was like, man, that's a good pick, was Eddie Jackson in the 4th round. The rest of them were all either reaches or just – it didn't make sense. Like, you got Zach Miller and Deion Sims. Why do you need to go out and draft Adam Shaheen in the 2nd round? I didn't get it. And unless Jordan Morgan's starting at left tackle for him over Charles Leno, I don't see that as a great pick.
Okay. I would answer this question, but my mouse just died on me, guys, so I can't click over to the window that I was going to look to see who I was going to pick, so I'll just skip it. I'm sorry, but let's just move on to the next question. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
All right, so when you can't read the questions, I'll read the questions.
No, I can read the questions. It's just I had a window open. I was trying to look at who was I going to pick for the worst draft, and I can't click over to it, so I'll just move on to the next question. Big Boy Brewski asks, thoughts on the other NFC South teams' draft picks and which team is our biggest threat this year?
The biggest threat this year is going to be the Buccaneers. By far. They're the best team in the division outside of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the best draft is probably the Panthers because they changed their roster. They basically said, hey, we're going to build ourselves to try and emulate what the Falcons did. They got a starting right tackle in Taylor Moton. They got a starting slot receiver / second running back in Curtis Samuel. They got a starting running back in Christian McCaffrey. Whether they want to admit that he's a starting running back or not, he's a starting running back. And they got a good pass rusher in Deshaun Hall to rotate with Charles Johnson and Julius Peppers. Like, that they only had like 5 or 6 picks, but those were good picks. And yeah, they drafted a kicker too, but unlike the Buccaneers last year, trading up into the 2nd round for a kicker, they took theirs in the 7th, where you're supposed to take kickers.
Okay. Got my mouse working again.
If you draft a kicker before the 6th or 7th round, you deserve to be fired. Just like if you draft a fullback before the 6th or 7th round, you deserve to be fired. Just like if you draft a punter before the 6th or 7th round, you deserve to be fired. I can forgive 6th and 7th round picks being spent on those guys because you're basically saying, I don't want to deal with the undrafted free agency and this guy's going to have a roster spot as a special teamer guaranteed because this guy can be a core 4 special teamer or this guy can be my field goal kicker. Like, I get that. But anything more than that, you're just a putz. You're just a fucking putz for doing it.
Okay. My mouse is working again, guys, so I can answer the previous question. I think the Jets had the worst draft. Not that they didn't get good players. They got a lot of good players, but they just didn't get any players that are really going to help this horrible, horrible team. When your first four picks are safety, safety, wide receiver, you're just not really sort of spreading the love on that one. As for the division, look, it's the Bucks. The Bucks have always been the team, that's going to really put the screws to the Falcons in terms of winning the division. They have a rising quarterback. They have with Deshaun Jackson. They have an explosive offense now. That's what you need. That's the difference between the Falcons' offense of last year and the previous years. The explosiveness of it, and Jackson helps you out there. They got Chris Godwin. They picked up O.J. Howard, who I don't think is, the generational tight end prospect that he's often built to be, but I do think he's a very good tight end that's going to be a problem for our defense for many, many years. So I think, I think everybody in the NFC South did a good job. They helped their team out. I don't necessarily love every pick. I think McCaffrey was a great pick for the Carolina Panthers. I think he's going to be a headache for years to come. I think McCaffrey will wind up being the player that people thought Reggie Bush was going to turn into. I think the Saints did a great job picking up Marshawn Lattimore to have him fall into their laps at pick 11. They need a number one corner that can hopefully not die when they play the Bucks and with Mike Evans and Julio with the Falcons. And Lattimore has the potential to do that. He'll probably struggle this year because all rookie cornerbacks generally struggle that aren't named Desmond Trufant. But, I think all those teams got some nice pieces for their futures that they can sort of build around, at least offensively or defensively. So, yeah. All right, this is our second to last question. Evan Birchfield asked, was there any players drafted in round one that you thought shouldn't have been first round picks?
Oh man, where do I start? This happens every year. I don't think Leonard Fournette should have been a first round pick, but he was taken number 4 overall. I don't think Mitch Trubisky should have been a first round pick, but he was taken number 2 overall. As fast as John Ross is, I didn't see a first round player. As solid as Marlon Humphrey is, I saw a high second rounder, but I got it. I understood why they did it. Adoree Jackson, third round guy. Garrett Bowles to me was a late second round guy, but they reached because there's no other player there. I saw Charles Harris as a late second. No offense to Tack, I saw him as a high third. And then David Njoku was a high second to me. Ryan Ramczyk was a high second to me. So, there were a bunch of players that, to me, weren't first-round picks that went in the first round. The fact that Adoree Jackson went 18th overall was just ridiculous, though. That didn't even make any sense.
Well, for me, the main guy I would look at is Jabril Peppers. I've been saying all offseason I don't think he's a first-round pick. And especially to a team like Cleveland. Like if Kansas City or Houston had taken him, I would have thought that was a good pick. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it makes sense for them since they already have, pieces and they can sort of plug and play with him as a role player in their defenses.
I thought Cleveland made the most sense because they had a defined role. He's going to play strong safety there. There's no other question as to what his role is. He's a strong safety, period.
I think I think he's the type of player that you don't really want a defined role, and if you do, it's going to be a small role. But in Cleveland, I think he's going to be an every down player, and I don't think that's really what he is. The other guy that shocked me, I wasn't necessarily saying that he shouldn't be a first round pick, but in light of the issues that he was going through, I thought it was shocking to me that the Raiders took Garyon Conley in round 1. I thought he was definitely going to fall to round 2. I thought Reuben Foster would fall, but it didn't shock me that he went in round 1, especially where he went at 31. Generally speaking, I think most years you're talking at most 20 to 25 guys that have first round grades or something like that. So pretty much if you're taking after pick 24, 25, I'm not going to really argue that you shouldn't have been a first round pick because you're generally taking the best of the best in terms of second round guys. But with Peppers in particular, I know he went pick 25. I don't know. It didn't make sense to me to pick him there and whatnot. I could be wrong about Peppers, and he might be way, way better. Like, I didn't think Tyrann Mathieu would be nearly as good as early as he was going to be in the NFL. I thought he was sort of overdrafted as well, where he went in like mid round 2, and I wound up being wrong. So maybe I could be the same with Peppers. But we'll see. All right, the last question comes from JRG at Chief Gonzalez 2. What do you think Atlanta's biggest challenge will be this year? To me, it's ending the season with 4 divisional games in a row.
I don't think that's going to be their biggest challenge. I think by that time they're going to know who they are as a team, and they'll, like, when people are like, well, 5 of the last 6 games are versus the division. Oh no, the sky is falling. Woe is us. That's whatever. Like, I would rather finish the season against the division because you say, this is what we're made of. This is who we are as a team. I like the fact that the first 10 games are going to be a test against the rest of the league, against the AFC East, against the NFC North. You're going to face some of the better teams in the NFL, in the Patriots, in the Packers, in the Bills, in the Seahawks, in the Cowboys. That's your stretch. I think the biggest thing the Falcons need to get over is the fact that they lost 28-3 in the Super Bowl, or they were up 28-3 in the Super Bowl and somehow lost the fucking game. I think that's really what they have to get over. If they can mentally get over that, I think they can beat any team on their schedule this year, period. No matter who it is, I think they can beat every single team on this schedule. And I think some of the teams are going to be nice little warm-up games, like the Bills or the Bears.
Yeah, I on a similar note, I think that really sort of the Super Bowl hangover is going to be the biggest challenge they face this year. I do think this team and this coaching staff can get them over that hurdle, but you got to go out and do it. You can say all the right things, but at the end of the day, like, they have to get back to a frame of mind where they're not thinking, like, this was the problem with the 2013 Falcons after they lost the NFC Championship game. They sort of thought, they got complacent. They sort of thought, okay, well, we deserve to be in the Super Bowl last year. We should just be able to pick up right where we left off. And they went through some early season adversity, and then Julio got hurt, and then, the season just went down the drain. And I think the biggest issue for this team this year is going to be, do they avoid that early season adversity? And if so, can they sustain it? Or are they going to be like a lot of teams that lose the Super Bowl, a lot of teams that make it far in the postseason and sort of feel jaded how the last season ended and sort of think they can just show up and be the team that they were, 8 months before, 9 months before? You got to go back to square one and start the grind all over again. I think this team is capable of doing it, but we just have to go out and see it. And so I think we'll find out, the early in the season against the NFC North and the AFC East, because that is, relatively speaking, the softer part of the schedule. I think those divisional games late in the year are going to be a very tough slate of games because divisional games are always tough. They got Seattle, they got Dallas as well. So it's one of those things where I think they can put themselves in a very favorable position by padding some early wins against some teams that they should be able to beat relatively easily in the AFC East and the NFC North. But if they don't, and they get off to like a 2-3 start or something like that, we might be in for a longer season than we want to see. All right, guys, that's our show for tonight. We appreciate everybody that tuned in on Facebook and YouTube. A lot of good conversation and debate in the comments and in the chats on both of those sites. So we appreciate you guys hanging out with us and, giving us a few laughs during the course of the show. If you guys want to submit your questions ahead of time to be on the show, you can use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can send them our way. Our Twitter handles should be on the screen below us. I'm at Falcon. Scott is at Karasik S. You can shoot it over to the show's Twitter handle at Falcons PFC. Check out our stuff at ProFootballCentral.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a rating and review. 5 stars, please. All that stuff. Find us on all your various podcast platforms like Stitcher and whatnot. So we will be back in 2 weeks unless something major happens. But we're probably going to take this every other week schedule through training camp. So I apologize if you did not get your draft questions answered on this show. You might have to wait 2 weeks to get those questions answered. But by all means, send them our way and we will get to them eventually. So that's our show, guys. We appreciate you all tuning in tonight, and we will see you in 2 weeks.